This is Frankie Lynch, Saturn Girl. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, and comment below. I want to know what you think, and it helps me out with the algorithm. Anyway, we have a big transit coming up in just a few days. On Saturday, July 22nd, Venus will station retrograde in Leo at about 28 degrees. She'll backtrack all the way to 12 degrees Leo before stationing direct again on September 3rd or so. The word station, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, means to stand still or remain. And we'll talk about what that means a little bit later when we go through retrogrades and what they actually are. So this makes for an extra long Venus transit, right? Venus will stay in Leo until early October, if I'm not mistaken. So this will be a few months here, almost 4 months that we've had Venus in Leo. So this is quite interesting for all of us because the house placement will tell us something about what's going on in our lives. But first, let's dive into the general and the specifics of what this means. So you see, this is a pivotal point in the Venus Synodic cycle. That is the cycle of her position relative to the sun. It's very similar to moon phases. You know, we'll start with a conjunction, which is like the new moon or the new Venus, right? And then we'll go to a full moon or a full Venus. Anyway, you see, this is the cycle between conjunctions. So Venus is reaching a pivotal point in this cycle. Now, let's talk about what the Venus cycle is. Well, first, Venus goes retrograde about every 18 months for 40 days. You might recognize the symbolism behind the number 40. For example, 40 was the sacred number of the Sumerian god Enki. He was one of the 3 primary gods of their pantheon. You may recognize this number also in Judeo-Christian symbolism. For example, rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights during the Great Flood in Genesis, Noah's flood. Noah waited 40 days after the mountain peaks became visible, right after the waters began to recede, before he sent out a bird, right? Sometimes it's portrayed as a dove and in other scriptures as a raven. But that's when the bird went and came back with the olive branch, yes? To show that there was habitable land. The Hebrew people lived outside of the land of Canaan, the so-called Promised Land, for 40 years. 40 years was considered the amount of time it took to make a new generation. 40 years was a generation. Jonah, the very unruly prophet, warned Nineveh, the famous Assyrian city, right? It had the most amazing library at its time, full of astrological and divination history, all the way back to ancient Sumer. And this unruly prophet, Jonah, warned that Nineveh would be overthrown in 40 days. And Nineveh was sacked by the Babylonians, of course, as revenge. In, 600 BCE or something like that. I don't remember when. Moses stayed on Mount Sinai for 40 days and nights, where he communed with God. Jesus fasted for 40 days and nights in the desert before his temptation. Lent is the 40 days preceding Easter. We can see that Venus was a very important element, or at least her cycle was, in ancient cultures, and even Judeo-Christian religions. So this synodic cycle, and if you want to do your own research, I really recommend Demetra George's book, Ancient Astrology, Theory and Practice, and it's volume 1. Volume 1 that has the section on planetary speeds and the retrograde cycle. So the Venus cycle it starts and ends with a conjunction with the sun. And we'll include 8 phases in this, just like we do with the moon. So number 1, there's the inferior conjunction, which happens during retrograde. Then there's the direct station, or the morning star rise, when Venus first appears after being hidden by the sun. Then there's her greatest elongation, when she's furthest from the sun. Then we have the morning set, when she sets as the sun rises. Then we have the superior conjunction, which is the conjunction where Venus is on the other side of the sun relative to the earth. And then we have the evening rise, when she rises as the sun sets. And then once again, we have the greatest elongation the other way, the furthest Venus can be from the sun. And then we have the retrograde station. And this is the evening star phase, when Venus is setting just after the sun. And then the cycle starts anew all again. So let's talk about what each of these phases mean, okay? So the inferior conjunction is when Venus is between the sun and the earth. This was considered, This is just preceding the direct station, when Venus first becomes visible, okay? This is when Venus is closest to us, closest to the earth. Some astrologers refer to Venus here as the earth goddess, or relating to her rulership of Taurus, being an earth sign. Like we said earlier, there's about 18 months between exact conjunctions. Cazemes to cazemes. Cazemes when a planet is considered in the heart of the sun, within minutes of the conjunction. So what is a retrograde? Right? Because this phase, this inferior conjunction, happens while Venus is retrograde. So retrograde motion is when a planet appears to move backwards through the zodiac. We know that the planets don't really move backwards. They all orbit the sun in the same direction, but at different speeds. Yes? For inferior planets, an inferior planet is closer to the sun than the earth. So those are Mercury and Venus. For inferior planets, as they approach the earth in terms of their orbit and overtake the earth, because they move faster, right? They will appear to move backwards through the zodiac as seen from Earth. And when they pass and overtake, then they will appear to move forwards once again. Now, Venus only goes retrograde in 5 signs during our lifetime. Currently, she goes retrograde in Aries, Gemini, Leo, Capricorn, and then late Libra or early Scorpio. So she's straddling 2 signs, if you will. What a bad mommy, straddling 2 signs. Anyway, if you trace those 5 signs, you get a 5-pointed star or pentagram. Venus will trace this pentagram pattern, which some compare to a 5-petaled lotus or flower. She'll trace this pattern over the course of 8 years. That's her greater cycle, the 8-year cycle. After 8 years, she will return to an inferior conjunction in the same sign on about the same date. So it's about 8 years for Venus to return to her same exact position, essentially. When Venus stations direct, she will first appear as the morning star, rising just before the sun, after being hidden for 40 days or so. Venus begins to speed up, or it looks like she begins to travel faster as seen from Earth. She then reaches her greatest elongation, her furthest distance from the sun. And we know that Venus is never more than 48 degrees or so from the sun, while Mercury is about 28 or so. Oh my God, I look so red. I got so much sun in California. Oh, I need to get my alabaster complexion back. Anyway. Now her distance from the sun begins to decrease, and then she begins to set as the sun rises, right? So this is the evening star phase. She reaches her fastest speed as she approaches the superior conjunction. Now, the superior conjunction is when the sun is between Venus and the Earth. She's conjoined with the sun, but she's the furthest. And I've heard some astrologers refer to this as her station as the Earth, or the air goddess rather, as her rulership of Libra. This is Venus as air, more removed from the Earth, more ethereal. Now, Venus is hidden during this phase because she's conjunct the sun. Following this, the distance between the sun and Venus begins to increase again. I got a little ahead of myself. Now we reach the evening star phase, when Venus becomes visible again after the superior conjunction. The distance between the sun and Venus gets wide enough so that she becomes visible as the sun sets. She begins to slow down, of course, as she reaches her greatest elongation, once again, her furthest distance from the sun. And she continues to slow down and can be setting just after the sun. Then she stations retrograde again, and the cycle starts all over, anew. About 15 degrees before and after her retrograde station is considered the shadow period, where we start to see preludes and then after effects or results of the retrograde. You know, the 15 degrees before, preludes, and the 15 degrees after, which is the after effects, which you can still see. Now, the last inferior conjunction we had was January of last year. And the last one in the same sign of Leo was in 2015. We had the inferior conjunction once again on August 13th, while Venus is retrograde. So you see, this is sort of like the close of an 8-year cycle, a Leo cycle, and the beginning of a new one. This is a momentous occasion. Now, what does Venus retrograde in particular mean, right? Well, Venus is what? Love, beauty, pleasure, social relations, the good and the bad. She's both social convention and social rebellion. Good manners and bad manners. Aesthetic and taste. She can also be what is repulsive and what we're repulsed by. Now, retrogrades symbolically are walking backwards, aren't they? And walking backwards can mean a revisiting of unfinished business. With Venus, it can also indicate past people and events, but specifically like exes and partners, addressing unresolved issues, perhaps around marriages, partners, or even opponents or adversaries. The seventh house is also adversaries, but we see that with Venus in terms of social relations too. Remember, houses do not equal signs. The 7th house does not equal Libra, but there are some overlapping themes. So, addressing issues with beauty, pleasure, relationships. Now, we also have taking things away, right? Oftentimes it's taking away things from vulnerable people or minorities or whatever. Taking away rights or taking away things that they've gained. Now, retrogrades also represent slowing down. So that tends to indicate delayed outcomes. Things take longer. And look at the house Venus rules for you, because that may tell you what topics are slower to come up. Now, retrogrades are also going against the grain or against the current. And that entails changes in social attitudes, doesn't it? That means attitudes towards sex, gender, and sexuality. What is normal, beautiful, or abnormal and ugly? What is socially acceptable? For example, transgender people in gay marriage, which do seem to correlate with these Venus retrograde cycles. And also the conservative backlash to progressive pushes. There's always, whenever there's forward momentum, there's always an opposing force. You know, in the Indian philosophy, there's sattvas, rajas, and tamas, right? Tamas is like the friction or the opposing force, right? Whereas rajas is the positive force or mind. And sattvas, as far as I'm giving to understand, is the rhythm or the balance and how they alternate. Anyway, before I get caught up in all that, going against the grain, right? So the conservative backlash too, but this also entails changes in aesthetics, which means fashion, music, art. Around these Venus retrograde cycles, we do see new fashion, we do see new music, and we do see new genres or types of expression in both of these. Now, retrogrades also bring reversals. That means a good situation could get worse, or a bad situation could get better. For example, if you're Aquarius rising like me, which means Venus retrograde will be transiting your 7th house, and maybe you're having a dry spell in romance, this could bring a new person or persons into our orbit. Pun intended. We also have defying convention. That's the reversals part here. We also see sexual dysfunction in particular cases of people. So, well, how about some celebrities with retrograde Venus? So we get a little, sense of how this is. Adolf Hitler. Oh my God. Why did I have to start with him? I mean, what else do I need to say about him, right? He's a failed artist, Venusian, and reportedly had sexual dysfunction. Another Venusian thing, perhaps retrograde. And fascism was all about aesthetic. I mean, a big cornerstone of the whole thing was those leather Hugo Boss uniforms, which, that may have been the only tolerable thing of the, of all the evil. But you see the aesthetic component, yeah? Now, how about Courtney Love, right? I mean, I love Courtney Love. But again, unconventional femininity, right? Venus turned around, right? She had the band Hole, and she had this image of being like a badass rock star girl, yeah? She also had a dubious relationship, Kurt Cobain, deceased frontman of Nirvana. Drugs and pleasure, licentiousness and intoxication were part of her whole image and her lifestyle. And her dad's name was found in Jeffrey Epstein's little book, his contact book. So that's not too good. That's not too good there. Now, how about the next person? Amy Winehouse, musician, amazing singer, very Venusian, gained international renown in 2008. Again, heavy drug and alcohol issues. Also promiscuity and whatever, which I personally don't think is a problem. But when it interferes with your career and your life, then, it does become a thing. Now, she also had relationship issues, and she was known for impulse control and eating disorders. You see, the Venusian presence warped around onto its head. Ted Bundy, the serial killer. Very likable person, apparently, right? Very Venusian sort of a way because the charm, the attraction. but it's turned over on its head, isn't it? Because it's hiding this pathological evil nature. No one suspected a thing. How about Jodie Foster? I love Jodie Foster. I love her so much. Hello, Clarice. Hello, Clarice. Anyway, and Contact is one of my favorite movies. She says in that movie, she says, the world is what we make it. And it's true. It is what we make it. We just tend to make it unconsciously. So, but that's another thing. Her first role, I mean, being an actress is very Venusian, but her first role was in Taxi Driver as a young prostitute. Venus retrograde. She had a reputation for muted femininity, or that's how I voice it, but sort of, you know, not as feminine presenting. She was more neutral, more balanced. And it turned out she's gay. She came out at the Golden Globe Awards a couple years back or something like that. But I was so happy. I was so proud of her. I love Jodie Foster. I don't want to try and impress her, though, by going after Reagan. I mean, former human Ronald Reagan is already deceased. It's just, you know the story. Was it John Hinckley? Was it John Hinckley who, attempted to unalive former President Ronald Reagan to impress Jodie Foster? Anyway, I mean, that's Venus retrograde, isn't it? Ellen DeGeneres, another actress, comedian, very Venusian, and what? Gay. A series of dramatic relationships like Anne Heche, which was all over the tabloids because crazy drugs and all sorts of stuff. Right? She was also investigated in 2020 for having a hostile work environment at the Ellen Show. Venus's social relations turned on their head. What else do we have here? Langston Hughes, the famous Black poet, playwright, and social activist, who is known as a fixture of the Harlem Renaissance, when Harlem was in vogue. Now, this was a very important time because this represented a big push in the advancement and the artistic history of Black Americans. He was also rumored to be gay. I don't think we have definitive proof of that, but I believe that was sort of the indications. So, not like it matters, but it's Venus retrograde, isn't it? So, now there's other indicators of LGBTQI membership having unconventional sexuality or gender dysphoria, or having intersex traits, right? That correlates with this, right? There are other examples, like, Alan Oken says you can have Venus or Mars, depending on what you were assigned at birth, in hard aspect to Uranus, indicating some of this too. I mean, I have Mars opposite Uranus, which I sort of credit with some of my, myself. So anyway, let's talk about some events that happen around Venus retrograde. And I want to focus, I'm trans, obviously, and I want to focus on events that surround trans issues because they correlate with Venus retrograde cycles, especially over recent history. So, Venus retrogrades have correlated with pivotal events for the transgender community. For example, as we approach the shadow period leading up to the last Venus retrograde in Leo, and that was 2015, remember, that was the beginning of this little cycle. Well, this is when Vanity Fair published their famous issue featuring Caitlyn Jenner on the cover. Now, I'm not a fan of Caitlyn Jenner for actually plenty of reasons, but this was a pivotal moment in transgender history. This effectively announced her transition. She came out a little bit before, like a month before, but this is when most people became aware of it. So, we, trans people, are about 1 to 2% of the population, and people aren't used to us being visible. So it's sort of like unconventional femininity, and so Venus retrograde, right? Now, during that same retrograde period, August of 2015, the National Institute of Health, the NIH in the United States, they announced they were conducting the first American study of transgender youth ever. And this was very important because there's been so many silly claims, right? And we won't go into those, but they're based on lies and misunderstanding. So it was important to have studies done. During that same retrograde period, once again, August 2015, the American Psychological Association, the APA, adopted guidelines for practicing psychology with trans people because most doctors had no clue. And transgender or gender dysphoria was improperly labeled before. Well, anyway, what else did we have here? Oh, they adopted the guidelines, right? And these guidelines represented very specific things about harassment and, how to address their experience, our experience. So we also have setbacks in trans rights, unfortunately, during these cycles. For example, March 2017, when Venus was retrograde, the Supreme Court rejected someone named Gavin Grimm's transgender bathroom rights case. So Gavin Grimm's, I believe a trans man, brought this case arguing that he had the right to use the bathroom of his gender identity. The Supreme Court refused to even hear it. So this was a setback. Now, in October 2018, Venus was retrograde once again. This is when I got separated, actually. The Trump administration tried to force key government agencies to only recognize gender based on biological sex at birth. I mean, what does that do? That would effectively remove all legal recognition of trans people. It would make us illegal. Well, thank goodness we passed that, but I mean, if he gets elected again, who knows what'll happen. Now, May of 2020, the Trump administration finalized a rule that would remove non-discrimination protections for LGBTQI people. Specifically when it came to healthcare and health insurance, which are the most important things for the transgender community. Then, a good development, a positive development, this year, in fact, June 20th, the day after Venus entered her shadow period for her retrograde, a federal judge permanently blocked Alabama's ban on gender-affirming care for minors. They cited the fact that the ban dismissed healthcare and science and the needs of people based on bullshit. So what does this mean for you? Well, it could mean several things. So Venus is relationships. And we often do see exes spring up out of nowhere. I've had this happen before. The last person I broke up with during a Venus retrograde, I believe it was in December, all of a sudden she's trying to get at me and everything else. So, that does happen. But it could also be trying to get back together, sometimes. It could also be a legal dispute with an ex-partner. Because, we'll get to what some of the ramifications are for that. But it could involve exes, which could involve legal disputes. But it could be meeting someone new. Someone new that somehow closes a chapter on old wounds or old feelings or maybe childhood hurts. It could also be taking care of beauty things. Going to a med spa or med spa procedures, getting sunspots removed or laser hair removal or elective surgery. Aesthetic. You may find your tastes in music, in partners, in clothing. You could see that all change. Maybe you just get nostalgic for music from your childhood. Like, I want to listen, for me, it was Cradle of Filth. I want to hear Cruelty and the Beast again. Anyway, hear me now. Oh, crime should be treasured if they bring thee pleasure somehow. Brrr. Anyway. Cruelty and the Beast. Anyway, I should. Oh, I love Danny Filth. Anyway, aesthetic. So how this looks for you depends on the house placement, of course. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to look at horoscopes now for each rising sign. Okay? And we're going to start here with Aries. Okay? So Aries rising, that means, if you see over here, that means Venus is in your 5th house. But she rules your 7th house of marriage and partnerships. And then is in your 5th house, right? So this could look like the booty call transit, quite frankly, because the 5th house is romance and sex and all that sort of stuff. And possibly with exes. Like, you know, someone calls you up and says, hey, what you up to? What are you doing? Right? You probably feel frisky anyway. But Venus also rules your 2nd house here, Taurus, right? 2nd house of money. So you may drop some dough on your kid's 5th house, right? Maybe a fun outing, maybe a big toy, maybe an electronic device. Now, how about Taurus? Taurus rising. So this is the 4th house, right? Venus rules your 1st house of self and is in your 4th house of home and parents and origins. So you may find out something new about your family heritage, origins, or your own history. You know, it may be something big, like, oh, you were adopted. Or it may be something small, like, you know, your grandfather was, you know, someone in the Civil War. I don't know. I doubt your grandfather's that old. Like, someone in the Vietnam War, probably now. I mean, my grandfather was in World War II, but you're all probably younger watching me now. Anyway, well, Venus also rules your 6th house, so you may find out a parent or grandparent has health concerns that you may have to help with. Now, how about our Gemini rising friends? Gemini rising. Now, Venus rules your 12th house of self-undoing and is now in your 3rd house of siblings, extended family, and your immediate community. So you want to watch out for mental health crises with those people, siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles. Right? Because the 12th house is the mental health stuff. So just be ready for some of those possible things. Now, Gemini, right? Oh, Gemini rising. So you may just reconnect with one of those extended family members. Again, siblings, cousins, etc. Venus also rules your 5th house, though, Libra. So it could indicate day trips, or fun excursions in your area, 3rd house, your immediate area. Maybe with your kids, 5th house. Or maybe with a romantic interest, 5th house. Well, what about Cancer rising? For our Cancer rising friends, Venus rules your 11th house of hopes and friends and is in your 2nd house of money. Do you have a small business? Maybe you'll get some social media advertising going, or people will boost you. You know, maybe a post goes viral. I don't know, but you may get a boost or some help or some notoriety from fans, clients, or patrons. I'm so sorry here. Perhaps you get some money. Oh, because Venus rules your 4th house also. So perhaps home and parents help you out with your financial situation. You know, perhaps it could be selling something, selling your house, or working from home, perhaps. Excuse me. Well, how about Leo rising? Oh, I love Leo rising. So funny. I have exes who are Leo rising, and I'm dating a Leo rising now. Well, sing, whatever that means. I don't know. I don't label things right now. But anyway, Venus rules your 10th house, right? Of career, action, life direction, and is in your first house of self. So this is very, very auspicious now, but it could have some unpleasant effects. You could be more high profile. You could get praise or recognition for stuff that you accomplished in the past. Venus retrograde, right? So, it could be a past project. It could be, your numbers or whatever. It could be like a little award. At one of my jobs, they used to give us little awards for our business acumen. Like if we got really good numbers, we get a little plaque. You got really good numbers, Frankie. You're so good. Let's put you at a different restaurant now. Excuse me. Well, what else with Leo rising? So either way, you do need to show off here. This is a placement where you need to sparkle and put on your best and to look hot. She's coming over today. Anyway. Now, Venus also rules your third house of siblings and community. So it may indicate for you staycations as well, similar to some of the other signs. Or perhaps you get help from a sibling, cousin, aunt, or uncle. How about our Virgo rising friends? Virgo rising. So this is the 12th house, okay? Venus rules your 9th house of spirituality, right here, Taurus, and is in your 12th house, yes? The house of self-undoing. So this is not a social time when you have 12th house stuff going on. And Venus is our social relations, right? So she's like, no, leave me alone. This is a time more to reflect or contemplate, perhaps about ideas, religion, the occult, or your political worldview. You could just be a bit brash and antisocial. Or you want to be careful about drinking and drugs, because that's also 12th house stuff. You may have a party thing going on, Venus also rules your 2nd house, so watch your money. We could see things like theft or losses, 12th house, right? Or you may want to spend money on silly things, right? Other 12th house stuff. Self-undoing, yeah. Now, how about our Libra rising friends? I love Libra rising. I had a Libra rising client yesterday. Now, Venus rules your 1st house of self, right? And your 11th, and is in your 11th house of hopes, wishes, dreams, friends. So I think of this as self-promotion, right? Sell yourself. Get your name out there. Maybe you'll get some attention from a group of people. Or I think of the 11th house as your audience too, or your fans. So you could see some increased visibility in that way. Now, Venus also rules your 8th house of death and debt. So make sure to budget yourself for unexpected losses or expenses, okay? This is something we need to be careful of. So, well, and the other thing, when your 1st house ruler is in your 8th house, we could have these fears that sort of envelop us, or, painful memories that all of a sudden captivate our attention, which, sort of stimulate our fear response, don't they? So just be aware of that. It may also be a processing time, but I'd like to think of this more as a social time, okay? Scorpio rising friends, one more time. Nice feeling, celebration tonight. Celebrate, don't wait too late. So I'm singing Daft Punk because I love them, but Venus also rules your 7th house of partnerships and is in your 10th house of action and life direction. These are angular houses, and this is really powerful and auspicious. So I'd really like this for you. I mean, some things I thought of where this could be someone you're attracted to at work. It could be someone you've already dated and we're revisiting here, or someone you've had a crush on for a long time because it's retrograde, so past things, right? Now, it could be someone else who has a hidden crush on you or has had for a long time. You just want to be careful because this retrograde in your 10th house could also bring embarrassing situations if you act too impulsively, right? Don't do things that you don't want advertised on a billboard necessarily, right? I mean, if you're like me and are shameless, you probably don't care. Now, the 7th house is also adversaries and opponents in both sports and legal issues. And Venus rules your 12th house. So there is a potential here of people working against you. People maybe who are jealous at work, right? Again, people working against you at work, right? Trying to subvert your projects or suggestions or reports or whatever. I used to work in a cubicle, so that's where my mind goes. I also worked in restaurants for a long time. Could be people who are jealous at work, or people acting out, lying and doing things because of their own mental issues. Maybe they're not purposefully, malicious, but they do have issues. 12th house, right? Sag Rising. What's happening with our Sag Rising friends? Sag Rising. That means Venus rules your 6th house, your Taurus, of enemies, obligations, and illnesses. And it's in your 9th house of spirituality, higher learning, religion, and of course there's travel there. So you may need to travel for your job or for business or for a spiritual thing. Like if you go to a retreat, or I'm part of a spiritual group that I have to travel for several times a year, these things could come up. Or you may just have a new spiritual commitment that you have to see through, right? 6th house and 9th house. Maybe someone in your religious community is talking shit and spreading gossip about you. In fact, religious communities, churches, whatever, synagogues, mosques, are notorious for gossip and judgmental bullshit. So this is quite likely. Now, Venus also rules your 11th house. So you could meet a new group of people, a new spiritual group, a new church group, a new political group. People who share your worldview. How about our Cap Rising friends? So for Cap Rising, Venus rules your 5th house of children and sex and fun, and is in your 8th house of debt and losses. So this could indicate dropping a good amount of money on your kids. Maybe they broke something expensive, right? Something of yours. Maybe they bashed a sprinkler, or they broke your iPad, or I don't know. But I'm talking about a relatively significant expense. Not like owing a country money. I don't know if anyone saw that Simpsons episode where Bart fools Australians into paying for a collect call that's over $900. $900 dues. Anyway, whole nother thing. So dropping money because of your kids, maybe you have to put something on credit, on your credit card or debt or whatever, Like I said, electronic device or something you have to get new. Now, Venus also rules your 10th house, Libra up here, right? Libra up here. So this could be fear and anxiety about your life direction or your job. This could also symbolize that a work friend leaves, right? Or gets another job, or unfortunately, maybe they pass. So you never know. I mean, the 8th house does sometimes indicate things like that. Those are the most dire significations of that. But still, I would be irresponsible or remiss if I didn't just mention it briefly, okay? I don't want anyone to get upset or scared, okay? Because 90% that's not the case. How about Aquarius Rising? That's me and my friends, Aquarius friends. So, Venus rules your fourth house, right? My fourth house, our fourth house of parents and home, and is in our seventh house, right? So for me, let me talk about what's happened to me so far in the shadow period. I was taking a vacation in California, where I came from, where I grew up. And as I was visiting, I was having a lot of emotional nostalgia, and I was crying a lot. So it was about letting go of my old home and embracing my new one. Now, also, old partners could come back, but in my case, I've been embracing a new one. But sometimes with Venus retrogrades, it could cause issues. And I'm really hoping she's nice to me. It could cause issues in these things. You know, maybe an ex causes issues in a new relationship. Or maybe there are just unresolved issues. You could be just building your new relationship. That's possible too. So Venus also rules our ninth house. So there could be philosophical or spiritual connections between you and a partner. Or political, right? They could be from another country, or have family from another country, or speak a foreign language, or be a professor, or someone technically inclined, or a priest, or whatever. I mean, I won't get into that, what priests are up to these days. Well, I mean, really all days, I guess. Well, let's finish up here with our Pisces Rising friends. How about Pisces Rising? So Venus rules your third house of community, media, and extended family, and is in your sixth house of illness and injuries, pets, and obligations. So a sibling, cousin, aunt, or uncle could have a health crisis that you have to participate in, or they assist you with a health crisis. Maybe they drive you to surgery or something. Stray cats, dogs, or even wild urban animals could come to visit. So, you know, like getting coyotes or raccoons in your trash, having a family of possums that are bothering you, gophers. I'm trying to think what else. You know, stray cats or dogs that come and eat your food or bother your pets or whatever. It could be fights with neighbors or disputes, you know, like over property lines or fences, or your pets, once again. Like, your dog always comes to shit on my lawn. No, he doesn't. No, my dog has a diaper. I don't know. I mean, we do hear about those kinds of things. For those of you who have, you know, who have owned a home, you know, these disputes with neighbors are pretty frequent. For those of you who've never owned a home, you may still have disputes with your neighbors over noise and other stuff. You know, in apartments. I live in an apartment. So, now Venus also rules the eighth house. So once again, dropping money. But on what this time? Well, it could be your own health crisis or the dispute with a neighbor, right? Maybe you have to pay for the fence or help pay for the fence or whatever. So these things we do often see. Now, that's the end here. We've gone quite long. This is almost an hour. 48 minutes. Jeez. So thank you for watching all the way to the end, if you did. And I hope you did. Your wildest dreams will come true if you did. I mean, not really, but we'll see. Like, subscribe, and comment. Remember, I do wonderful readings. I'm the best. All my information to contact me and for my social media links is below. Please follow me on social media. I say lots of fun, interesting things, and I can be quite crude and funny. So please, 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 I love you. You are beautiful, and have a wonderful whatever you're having.